Um, you know, so again, this is so as far as the prisoners in Plato's Myth of the Cave or Allegory of the Cave are concerned, reality would consist of nothing but, yeah, the shadows. Okay, so it's C. And I don't think there's any particular letter that always gets chosen more, but it happened to be C there. Now, let me say something, and I had to get up a new one kind of quick. Oh, okay, never mind. On 4, I've got an all the above question. So, but you want to read through all the options. If you see it's A, don't assume that it's A without looking at the other options. Because if you look down at 4, which we haven't gotten to yet, the D option is all the above. So it's possible that it's A, but it's also B and C, and the correct answer is D, all the above. Now, there may be some with a none of the above option, too. That's not going to appear on all questions. On the graduate, the GRE, the philosophy exam you get when you're going to grad school, the D and E options on every single question, or was it E and F? But the last 2 options were all the above and none of the above on every single question. I don't make it that hard, okay? There's going to be 4 options, and also, since it's Scantron, there's only one correct answer, okay? These are not multiple choice. And you do want to make sure, again, I'll have some pencils, but if you bring your own, what wears down on mine more than the pencil leads and stuff, which I can sharpen, is the erasers. Sometimes they get a little funky and they don't erase, so as I said, try to bring your own, but I will have some. So epistemology, remember we went over the branches of philosophy. The only pie I'm really concerned with is that one that lists the basic branches, like epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, that. So, how many had A? No, how many had B? Okay, what about C? Okay, what about D? We're not, it's not D. We haven't done any. C is actually the correct answer for metaphysics, but for this one, B is the correct answer, knowledge. So the B's have it on this one, okay? 3. Now we did not go over the apology, except for there were little snippets of it. But this is one of the main points made in the apology, right? Socrates argues that A, the examined life is not worth living. B, how many had A? Yeah, the unexamined life. Yeah, so the other ones are wrong. So 3 is A. Now, we did go over the Crito. So in Crito, Socrates argues that we should obey the laws of society because how many had A? They're established by the gods. Okay, what about B? They're made by those who are stronger than ordinary citizens. No, that's what he argued against Thrasymachus about. C, we entered into an understood contract to obey them simply by living in the society we're living in. Yeah, it's C. In other words, Socrates says he could have left. Since he didn't, he thinks himself to be under a contract. And again, if you need to review these, I printed out some of what I used to use for a review sheet, summarizing some of Socrates' main arguments. Now, I'm not asking you to be able to recreate the argument technically, but it's a succinct way of showing you his reasoning and the reasons he gives for not accepting his friend's offer. So the released prisoner, which of course is in the myth of the cave, right, comes to realize this was the way I worded it here made this kind of a hard question. Realize that what he saw before, that is the shadows, was A, true reality. How many had A? What about B, an illusion? What about C, of little or no value? What about D, both B and C? Very good for those of you who saw that. Yeah, it's actually D. Now, there aren't going to be many questions like this where I'll, single out two of them out of three. But I mean this to be a sample of the kind of thing you might see. So there will also be some true and false. I forget whether it's 10. It's not an exact number. I just went with what I had, but somewhere around 20 to 10. Not exactly that. In other words, 20 multiple choice, 10 true and false. It's not exactly that because. Okay, so remember, for the true false, I'm sure most of you grew up using Scantrons and. Oh, you know what? Let me go pause this for a second. Okay, so basically this one for number 4, then it's C. But note, number 4 has an all the above option. There are also maybe some that have a none of the above option. So you want to make sure you read through all of them. Okay? Number 5, the released prisoner. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We already did this. We're down to true, false. Now, on the actual Scantron, you'll probably remember from high school, A equals true, B equals false. Right? I just say circle it here because you're just writing it on the. Socrates attempted to escape from prison, but his escape plan was foiled.
False.
Yeah, it's false, right? He decided not to do it for moral reasons. 7, in Plato's allegory, the prisoners were glad when their friend told them about the world outside the cave.
False.
Yeah, false. They really didn't understand what he was talking about, didn't see the value, and what do they say they'd do to somebody if he tried to take them on that kind of a philosophical journey? We'd kill him, right? Because, and who does Plato have in mind when he says something like that? I mean, it's really a sideways reference to Socrates, right? That the people in now I already put some of this stuff on the blackboard. Hold it. So I'm not going to do it again for the sake of time. But remember, I am recording this, so if I go through a little fast, you can replay the tape. Well, of course, the prisoner situation, there is what they're wearing, and here I'm not concerned about clothing so much as the fact that they not only have their hands and feet chained, but what else?
Their neck.
Yeah, their necks, right? And so what's the reason for that? Well, the second one kind of indicates that, right? with their heads and their necks chained, they theoretically can look only in front of them and what's in front of them.
Shadows.
Yeah, the shadows on the wall, right? That's what their vision is limited to. Well, who are the prisoners supposed to be like? Us, exactly. And not in the sense that we too have been caving before in our lives, right? But as I said, in the sense that we too grew up in a particular intellectual environment from where we're bombarded with ideas just like that form our worldview, our picture of what we think is true about the world.
So basically it's what we perceive to be true.
Well, yeah, in other words, like the prisoners, what we perceive to be true, what we call our unreflective beliefs which we've just soaked up from our environment and not necessarily reflected on as to whether they're good beliefs. We think they're true, but philosophy challenges us to reflect on our beliefs. When he says philosophy is critical, he means that philosophy is reflective. It isn't always negative, and it isn't always... Well, nihilistic is critical in a way that says knowledge isn't possible, and not every philosopher takes that view, even though the sophists did. We're not worried about them. Okay, we skipped over Plato. Scratch through Plato's theory of reality. I may hint a little bit about it later, but I remember we scratched that part in the syllabus. But what these represent? Well, of course, the cave is kind of like our own cultural environment, the world we live in. The prisoners, we already said, are us. The shadows are what our beliefs are about, the beliefs that we've just soaked up from our culture without even thinking about them. Look, basically the fire and the sun are what kind of sheds light on real knowledge. In Plato's story, the fire represents the sun in this world, and outside the cave, the sun represents the form of the good, which we're not going to get into, okay? But the objects casting the shadows, again, might be, true beliefs. It's hard to press this, because remember, Plato does mean this to be a story about his ultimate theory of reality. It's hard to press the view on a book, in every detail the way you can if you're talking about this theory of reality. But again, the released prisoner represents the philosophy student, the budding young philosopher. The guide, the person who guides the prisoner, is the philosophy teacher or the more experienced philosopher. In turning round, he's made to confront the beliefs he's soaked up all his life, right? Are unreflective. That is, the beliefs we haven't reflected on as to whether or not they're good. And the journey of the prisoner represents the journey of philosophy, where we reflect on, we examine our beliefs, and we take a critical attitude toward them. And one of the two things we're looking at, as I put on the blackboard, are basic concepts and also the reasons that support them. So the world outside the cave would in this story would be true beliefs about the world, which may not be what we've gotten from our culture, you know, and we may have to revise some of our views about what are good beliefs. I mean, look at it this way. You know, if there were no big fat man at the North Pole who brought you toys every Christmas, you wouldn't want to go around still believing that there was, right? But there are other more, you know, serious situations where we may have soaked up beliefs from our culture, and our culture is not always right. I mean, look, somebody who grew up in the segregationist South, in Birmingham, where Dr. King was, would have soaked up the belief from their culture that slavery was morally justified. Maybe even had a religious basis. I mean, people on both sides of the slavery issue were quoting the Bible. Okay? And they would have soaked up a belief from their culture that we now would say is simply wrong. You know, I mean, that's an example of, you know, and what Martin Luther King was trying to do is the same thing Socrates tried to do. Confront them about cultural beliefs that they have and have thought are good beliefs, and, you know, show them that they're wrong. So Martin Luther King says, just like Socrates, who wanted to be a gadfly, a horsefly, and challenge people on the streets of Athens, and created a tension, you know, by confronting people with their beliefs, what's done with the released prisoner, because remember, the released prisoner is shown the things in front of the fire and told that they're more real than the shadows. And at first he doesn't want to believe it, but he finally comes around. And so Martin Luther King basically is, that's, no, I picked that up before, and it's a robocall from somebody's creditor. So. Who knows? Nobody knows I'm here, so I don't think it's for me. But
so basically, the still slave prisoners.
Yeah, the
The
prisoner.
released prisoner was outcast, like because they got released, they was in a sense an outcast.
Yeah, when he comes back, his buddies don't want to take that journey because they think it's ruined his eyes. And that shows the sort of suspicion, both in Socrates' day and in our own day, that the average person may hold philosophy and even science, right? There are people who are, you know, suspicious of science if it seems to be, you know, putting evolutionary theory, you know, ahead of their religious views and so. Now there are ways to reconcile Genesis with evolution, but we're not. We'll look at that later when we talk about the design argument. Well, some of these are ways of summarizing Socrates' own reasoning. Remember, what Socrates says is, Crito, you're really worried about public opinion. Socrates says, that's not what's going to sway me here. You know, basically his buddies say, what's the public going to think of us? They're going to say some friends they could have broken him out and they wouldn't spend the money to do it. And they wouldn't do it. They had a thing on 60 Minutes last night about that drug dealer who got broken out of prison in Mexico. You know, so, and they say, Socrates, don't you know that public opinion in the state can, you know, can sentence you to death like that? You know, shouldn't you be concerned about public opinion? He says, no, you know, that's not how truth is determined or discovered. You know, I'm not going to take a public opinion poll to decide what I should do here, says Socrates. You know, he says, I'm going to reason about things morally. And while we didn't read the whole thing, Socrates believes he is like an athletic trainer, an Olympic trainer. And he says somebody should listen to their trainer who's an expert, not, an Olympic athlete, not just public opinion. Public opinion might say, oh, go ahead and eat that cheeseburger, you know. Might not be good for training. So Socrates says, what I am going to listen to is what argument seems best. You know, so here we see philosophy saying the best beliefs are the ones with the best reasons, and that's why we need to examine not only our beliefs but the reasons we have for holding them. So here's some of his quick reasoning. I get a little technical here. Don't worry about the whole logical structure here, but he says he'd overturn the laws of the state, and he says overturning the laws of the state and disregarding the verdicts of its courts would harm the state, because wouldn't, you know, you'd have anarchy if that happened. You know, that's what we had here a year ago, right? Anarchy in the streets. If I harm the state, then I harm another. Socrates views the state as almost being like another person. So he says because there's a moral principle that says I shouldn't cause harm to somebody without any good reason. So he says if I harm the state, I am causing harm to somebody, and there's a moral principle that I shouldn't do this, so I should not escape, since escaping is going to harm the state by disregarding the verdict of its courts. Remember, he could have chosen exile at his trial, and he rejected that option by saying instead, give me free meals for life in the elaborate dining hall. Give me a state pension. So if the state raised me, Socrates thinks that the state's like a parent to him, since it brought him up and his parents got married by the laws of the state. But then he says if the state is like a parent, I'd be disobeying a parent. And he also says he's not on the same level, just like a child isn't on the same level as their parent, where if they're punished unjustly, they don't have the right to strike back. So, therefore, he says if I should escape, I'd not only disobey a parent, but I'm not on the same level. So, if I should be obedient to my parents, I should be obedient to the state and its wishes here, he says. Now Socrates reasons that if he voluntarily chose to live in Athens, then he has an implied agreement to obey the laws. And so basically, in the next thing he says, if I escape, then I would break a contract, an understood contract, not a formal contract where people sat around a table, and Socrates signed documents that says he's going to obey the laws of Athens. But, so he says I'd break that agreement, so I'm not going to escape. So he basically concludes that he has a moral responsibility to stay there and await execution of the sentence. So what you have, the reason the one for Aristotle is so detailed is I've done the work for you and I've printed out the outline version of the Aristotle PowerPoint. Again, you want to pay special attention to the model of a virtue for Aristotle and to how we develop. But if you go over that, and again, remember what Yogi Berra said. Sometimes you can observe a lot just by watching. Whether it's looking at the PowerPoint again, or looking at the Tegrity file, or just reading over this, sometimes and if you don't, if something's not clicking with you, go over it again. So put the bulk of your study time then into looking at things like the PowerPoint. Use the book mostly for your essay. Like I'm not going to go over specific quotes from the Nicomachean Ethics, but the PowerPoint, although not in the same order as it is in your text, lists most of the main points. So try to get here on time as much as you can with your Scantron and a number 2 pencil, although I'll have pencils. Okay, gonna let you go. Naturally, this is yours to keep. If you need a printout of the essay questions or the review sheet, there's some up here. So, and if somebody could bring up the roll, let me stop the tape. Not the tape. That's old.